Over the years, we've become accustomed to Nintendo pivoting away from core gaming audiences and towards the more casual crowd, with titles like Wii Sport, Mario Kart, and Nintendogs successfully capturing a broad demographic beyond those who might traditionally be expected to play video games. However, one interesting wrinkle of the emergence of a mouse mode in Switch 2 is that it offers Nintendo a chance to pivot in a quite different direction towards PC gaming audiences. Clearly, Nintendo will never be able to compete with high end PCs for graphics and processing. Even handheld PCs like the Steam Deck are problematic for Nintendo to compete with, as Switch revisions come along infrequently, while the handheld PC market is quickly becoming quite crowded. However, that's not to say that PC gaming should be off Nintendo's radar, and in this video I want to explore the opportunities available to Nintendo and the ways in which the company might want to pitch itself towards this demographic. Firstly, let's review the market. The PC gaming market is experiencing consistent growth, with Play Today estimating it as going from around $11 billion in 2022 to $13 billion in 2023, although much of this relies on free-to-play Asian games, and I have seen quite varied estimates. PC gaming is also particularly successful in Eastern Europe, where Nintendo's nostalgia-based marketing based on happy Nintendo experiences during the 80s and 90s don't have the same hold as they do in the West, with those countries rather preoccupied in this period with the fall of communism and less with Link and Donkey Kong. Still, the population of Eastern Europe as of 2025 is estimated to be around 300 million people, with getting on for 40 million people in Poland, which has a large market and is growing as a result of being used as a manufacturing hub, particularly for Germany, and because of its rising wages and living standards. This represents a new market for Nintendo just in itself. Of course, the presence of such a market is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it means that there are going to be a large number of play experiences that, if they could be bought to Switch 2, would bolster the appeal to general consumers of a Switch 2 console as an entry point into the broader Nintendo ecosystem. On the other hand, it's not in Nintendo's interest to pivot its huge established markets in Japan, North America, much of Europe, Australasia, and so on, just to cater to a PC-focused crowd. But since Switch owners are already more likely to own a second console or gaming machine, the potential for people to own both a gaming PC and a Switch 2 could be fairly high, and this represents a market opportunity for Nintendo. Basically, it's unlikely to dent their existing strategy if they also want to explore a PC adjacent market, and this is important. Instinctively, it might seem that PC gaming's natural console equivalents are the PlayStation and Xbox, i.e., top of the line powerhouse machines which can cater to people who like their games juicy. Microsoft, synonymous with PCs for a generation, alongside Sony, can offer the power that PC gamers so often pursue, while Nintendo has consciously avoided this arms race. However, the emergence of portable PCs has changed the situation somewhat in recent years, demonstrating that this kind of gaming experience on the move can be a compelling audience proposition. Microsoft Gaming CEO Phil Spencer has already confirmed that more Xbox franchises will be coming to the Switch too, and we know that Call of Duty will be among the franchises to make the leap. Spencer has previously mused about bringing even Xbox Game Pass to as many devices as possible, but cautioned in 2020 that the full Xbox experience would not translate well to a non-Xbox console. Besides, it could make more sense for Microsoft to pursue their own handheld console than surrender their market share indefinitely to Nintendo. I think there's only about a 30% chance that we will see Game Pass on Switch 2 by the end of 2028, but if it happened, it would be a true game-changing moment, and it would make sense, therefore, to see a big effort from Nintendo to support this partnership technically. Steam seems far less likely, probably only 10%, given that there's not even the opening bar of mood music from either Nintendo or Valve concerning such a move, and the fact that the Steam Deck is being positioned as a competitor in this space. But long term, it would be very much in Nintendo's interests to make the case for Steam on their system, and the best strategy they have to do this is to ensure that the Steam Deck can't establish a significant enough market share to challenge Nintendo's dominance in the handheld space. And so we come back to Nintendo making a huge attractive offer to potential players in the PC gaming space. What would this look like, and where should we expect the line to be drawn between reasonable accommodations to move into this gaming niche and impossibilities which would scupper the Switch 2's position in the market as a relative low-cost option? Now, philosophically, PC gaming, a world of endless iterative customization and tweaking to achieve ever more precise performance levels, is a world away from Nintendo's approach of having basically a toy that works out of the box. And I don't expect Nintendo to be going very deep down that rabbit hole, but that's not to say that they won't make a pitch that Switch 2 is at least a reasonable way to experience PC games commensurate to the system's far lower cost. First of all, let's talk equipment. The two most obvious accessories for which a PC game can utilize are a mouse and a keyboard. I confess I haven't used a mouse since you had to take out the trackball to clear the fluff out of it, but in the gaming space, mice are far more evolved these days. I'm always loath to get into technological specifications, so take the following with a pinch of salt, and I'll pin any comments from more knowledgeable, tech-minded individuals on this topic, but let's take a look. One key consideration for a mouse is what's called the polling rate, which is the frequency the mouse sends information to the computer about its position and button presses, something which is measured in hertz. Most computer mice have a polling rate of 125 hertz, and from what I can discern, this seems to be approximately the refresh rate of the Switch Joy-Con as well. PlayStation 5's DualSense controllers go up to 250 hertz. However, some gaming mice are considerably higher, often at 1000 Hz, and some gaming mice reportedly go up to 8000 Hz. Again, Nintendo is never going to be able to compete with the ultra high end, but if they were to offer in the new Joy-Con anything north of 125 Hz, it would make the responses feel more immediate. Given that even lower cost computer mice seem to offer 1000 Hz play, it strikes me as plausible that this technology could be incorporated by Nintendo if they wished, using cheap, seasoned technology that they like so much. On the other hand, most televisions peak at 120 Hz, even where technical tomfoolery allows them to advertise higher figures, such as with True Motion, which means that even if the input lag is cut down from, let's say, 8 milliseconds on a button press to 1 millisecond, this wouldn't actually be very obvious on screen, and even if a screen were capable of displaying it, it is highly unlikely that the Switch 2 would be sufficiently powerful to generate images at this pace. And of course, the OLED's 60Hz display is currently the limit for a Switch model in terms of the screen on the Switch itself. Data miner Oatmeal Dome seems to have identified that there is at least the potential on paper for 240Hz displays coming out of Nintendo games, and this would leapfrog current competitors in the handheld space, such as the Steam Deck OLED's 90Hz and 120Hz for many gaming-focused phones. Generally, my view with Nintendo is to expect specs on the lower end in every case, and I certainly don't expect to see them hit 240Hz on their refresh rate at this point, but even being able to advertise 240Hz input through the mouse mode would at least give the company a slight nudge on your bog standard 125Hz mouse. To be honest, I think the fact that Nintendo is showing willing at all to incorporate a mouse mode is probably as far as they will go at this time. But then, of course, there is the keyboard. Keyboards are actually quite tricky for a company like Nintendo, which manufactures at an international scale because, of course, they would need to be localized for all their different markets, which have different standards. It's not that this is impossible to do quite cheaply, and I think if they're permitting mouse mode, there has to be a 50% chance that an official Switch 2 keyboard will also follow by the end of 2027. But Nintendo is never likely to be interested in programmable macros, backlighting, optical switches, and anything else that PC gamers might be interested in using in a top-spec keyboard. Still, Nintendo want their games to be playable on the move, and it's hard to imagine people wanting to whip out a keyboard for most titles. Sure, the Switch's on-screen keyboard would allow for a reasonable facsimile of the same play experience, but it would be very cumbersome to use. The great advantage of a keyboard is less that Nintendo themselves would use it, although I'm sure they would give it some kind of cursory support, especially if they do go down the rumoured route of some kind of social media solution in their games built into the console. Rather, the advantage is that they would open up the field for third parties to experiment and play around. Nintendo have done this kind of thing before. The IR sensors on the Joy-Con were not used by many games. The Beat 'em Ups channel did a great review a while back, but if you discount first-party efforts like 1-2-Switch, Labo, Ring Fit Adventure, Game Builder Garage, and Brain Training, you're down to only a handful of gimmicky indie titles like Spy Alarm, Night Vision, and apparently Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 on Switch, which used the IR camera, even though they were not directly from Nintendo themselves. In this sense, having a keyboard accessory, even if only a handful of games really had any benefit from a keyboard, would be an easy win, as surely there are, by a factor of thousands, many more games that could potentially use a keyboard on Switch than would utilize an IR camera. The key, though, is that Nintendo do need to establish the market first. You can't rely on some indie studio with a text-heavy adventure game breaking down the doors for keyboard ownership on the Switch. First-party titles need to kick down the doors first, and after that, all others will follow. And so a major keyboard-centric game or app would need to be part of the Switch 2's lineup, probably its early launch lineup. The obvious solution here is gaming which requires communication, a big risk for Nintendo, who trade on their child-friendly walled garden approach to gaming and who also like to exert extreme control on their user base. Even the very modest customization allowed on Splatoon and Animal Crossing has led to sloganeering, political exploitation, and more, which Nintendo would doubtless find challenging. Have they managed to find technological, perhaps AI-based solutions to flagging and monitoring content which they don't wish to see? One option suggested by rumours around the playtest game is that they could take the role of teacher and explicitly model good behaviour, allowing people greater access as they accord to Nintendo's gameplay priorities. Threading this needle will of course be exceptionally difficult, but the potential is huge if they can cultivate a social play area that has strict rules that people can trust. Basically, any PC gamer parent who would like their children to get into similar kinds of games, but is anxious about the free-for-all on the wilds of the internet, has the opportunity to rely on Nintendo's hard-won reputation on this front. The challenge is immense, especially since social credit systems have a slightly sinister overtone, but when it comes to creating a safe space for online gaming, the rewards are also, I would suggest, pretty vast, and this is one area where Nintendo doesn't need hugely expensive technological tomfoolery, but rather good software solutions, innovative ideas, and their existing reputation for being a safe, family-friendly environment in order to really excel. If you were a developer with a game that could run on PC, but which was ideally going to be targeting children, Roblox say, being able to integrate with Nintendo's existing systems in order to ensure user safety could be huge. A further challenge comes with voice chat. If Nintendo does their own headset and even permits voice chat, it would be a drastic change in their approach so far, but yet again, the rewards are potentially quite significant. Here's a crazy way I can imagine this could work. This isn't a forecast remotely, but just something I'm throwing out there. Live translation headsets using artificial intelligence already exist, but those are very pricey. However, what if Nintendo allowed for people's words to be translated not just between languages, but to a far more limited range of expressions? Essentially, you would need to train players to use a set lexicon of words and phrases that fit within the game, or most of their words would not be translated. Over time, this could become quite large. The sheer amount of data from people playing would allow Nintendo to observe how players use language and come up with phrases that could be recognized by the system and incorporated into the game. But it would be less than a full dictionary and would not include any words that are not useful for the game. So essentially, as a player, you would talk as normal, but other players would not hear a real-time voice, but an artificial voice approximating what you've said, or abridging anything that is not appropriate. This would be tricky for complete real-time communication, but it would make it possible to have more complex interactions than those allowed, for example, by the D-pad commands on Splatoon. However, there would be no language issues, no potential for malign individuals to operate, and no real scope for social interaction more broad than the game itself. Obviously, this would be frustrating for adult players who may well be able to opt out of such a system for some games. I can't imagine this kind of infantilism appealing to hardened Call of Duty addicts, but for Splatoon and Animal Crossing, for example, as well as third-party games targeting a similar audience, it could allow for far greater interactivity than we have at present without safety becoming an issue. After all, Nintendo's perspective has always been that if you want a conversation, use your phone as you play, and so I think they would view any voice functionality on their new console as needing to offer something distinctive from simply replicating someone's voice. Now look, all of this is highly theoretical, and frankly, it remains to be seen whether Nintendo will even show any deep interest in courting PC gamers. They may take the view that while a mouse mode is a free hit to add a new way to play given the existing tech that they're using, it's not a major strategy that they will want to get behind. But I do think there is significant potential in the way Nintendo could position the Switch 2, and I, for one, will be very interested to see what more emerges from the House of Mario in the next few months. Thank you to everyone who has liked, subscribed, commented, shared, and/or checked out the Patreon, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.